Relax and listen to the voice. Hello everyone. The stories that you're about to hear were submitted online by users who claim to have had encounters with ghosts. Some of the stories are complete in narrative. Some of them are questions. It's up to you to decide whether they are interesting, true, or fraudulent. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Here we go. We used to live in a one-bedroom apartment that I had purchased. As per Hindu traditions, we did all the rituals before residing in the house. This happened to me when I was living alone and my husband was out of town. I was sleeping at night, and I don't know if I was asleep or half awake, but I saw a silhouette of a person, but I could see a red t-shirt, a shirt like my husband wears. The hair on this person was pokey, standing up. I could see white eyeballs and a black face with its bared teeth, pointy and white. This was the first time it happened. When I woke up fully, there was nothing there. The incident was mostly forgotten, but there was a silhouette of it in my mind. Now we're in a different house. My husband is beside me. Again, I'm awoken from sleep with the same silhouette, but this time the silhouette is wearing a cap and a cloak. It has the same features, the same eyeballs, and the same white, pointy teeth. When I fully awake once again, there's nothing there. There have been 3 to 4 instances that I have felt someone or something pick my hand up, which begins to wake me up, and just as I start to fully awaken, I feel my hand being dropped. At first I thought this was a reflex action for maybe a bug or mosquito bite. I've felt and seen the same things in different rooms. Once I was sleeping on my side and felt like something or someone was pulling my shoulders backwards. The movement woke me up and I pulled my shoulder back into place. I'm not sure what's happening here. Perhaps some sort of parallel universe thing? Someone trying to wake me up in a parallel universe and me feeling the motions here? Or could it be a ghost? I recently inherited an antique mantel clock. I inherited it from my mother, who inherited it from her mother. It may have come from Germany when my great-grandmother came to the U.S. She would have brought it over in the late 1800s. My birthday was just the other day. This clock cannot run. It's not wound up, and the pendulum isn't attached to make it run. It has not ran at all, and there's no way that it can run. It needs to be repaired, and I would have to take it to a clockmaker or someone who does repairs. As I said, my birthday was a few days ago. That clock ran and chimed all day long on my birthday. At the end of the day, my daughter said, "If that clock runs again in 3 days on your grandson's birthday, we're moving out because that is scaring me." I tried to console her and tell her I didn't feel anything negative, but unfortunately, I feel like I have the curse. Well, that's what I call it. I feel like I can tell if there's a presence in a place, and I can tell if it's demonic or not. I can see them, and I have seen them at times, since I was a kid. I retired as a pastor and have witnessed many things in my life, but on my birthday, the day was peaceful, and there was just this feeling of calm in the air. The next day, the clock didn't run, and it hasn't worked since my birthday. I told my daughter that I thought it was either her mother, her grandmother, or her great-grandmother who originally owned the clock. Side note, my great-grandmother was the aunt of Wild West outlaw Jesse James. Those three women loved each other very much, and they loved that clock because it reminded them of one another and the love that they shared. I'm not sure where it came from. It was probably a wedding gift, or a gift from my great-great-grandfather or some other family at my great-grandmother's wedding. As far as I can recall, it was always a gift of love, so I don't feel like it could be an evil entity. Within my family, there's been a pastor for at least 4 generations. I don't think that this evil entity would hang around their homes. On my grandson's birthday, it didn't run at all. I jokingly told my daughter that she cheated her son out of a birthday party like I received from the 3 or 4 of his great-grandmas. Sometimes, to me, these visitations aren't scary. It truly felt like a loved one was just popping in to say, "I love you and I'm checking on you." Or maybe just showing up to be a part of the birthday festivities. In 1999, my boyfriend was the contractor for renovations on a hotel in downtown Austin, Texas. Some evenings I'd take dinner to him, and sometimes I'd help paint the walls of a few rooms. That didn't happen often though, as he would complain that I let the paint drip onto the floor. One evening while I was waiting for Mark, I wandered the hotel, going down to one floor that was closed to the public. It was dimly lit with some ladders, some scaffolding, and plastic drop cloths scattered around. I started down one hall. The beginning of the hall had a tad of lightning emanating from a few sconces attached to the walls. Further down, the hall lights were off, and it was pitch black. I remember looking at the wallpaper and thinking, no wonder they're updating this. As I was walking down the hall, an eerie feeling overcame me and grew stronger as I moved closer to the unlit end. The feeling grew more powerful, to the point where all my hairs started to stand on end and a sickening, cold feeling started to wash over my skin. While peering into the darkness, I could hear voices, like loud whispers. I froze in my tracks and then pivoted, instantly giving up my curiosity, and started walking away, and then, shortly after that, began running. Somehow I had gotten turned around, and I couldn't find my way back to the elevator. My heart was beating wildly as I scrambled for an exit, running into one of the plastic drop cloths that was hanging from the ceiling. Eventually I found the elevator, and in a panic, repeatedly hammered on the door button. My hands were shaking, and I kept looking behind me, thinking something would be there. When I made it up to the floor and found the room where my boyfriend was working, I was in a daze. He asked me what was wrong, but I didn't feel that I could tell him. Like, he would just think that I was weird or scaring myself or something. Many years later, I was reading a book about America's most haunted places, and right there, in that book, I couldn't believe it. There was the hotel that I had been in, the Driscoll Hotel. The room I had been next to in that dim hall was one that had been closed off for years. They reopened it during renovations. The room had been closed off because women, on different occasions, had committed suicide in the same room, the same bathroom, on their wedding nights. I'm sure that people will be skeptical in hearing this, but I fully swear that this experience I had was real. I can't stress enough how true this event was. I can even give the name of the contractor who did the renovations, and I had absolutely no clue at the time that the hotel was considered haunted. This morning, at about 2:03 a.m., my phone rang. It was my daughter calling me from upstairs in her bedroom. When I answered, she whispered and urged me to please rush upstairs. This frightened me, and I didn't know what to expect. I reached into my nightstand and grabbed my can of pepper spray and rushed upstairs. As I reached the top of the staircase, I got cold shivers all over my body. My daughter's bedroom was on the same level as the kitchen. I opened her bedroom door, and she was sitting straight up in bed. I asked her what was wrong, and she quietly told me that she was awoken by voices coming from the kitchen, and that she also heard the floorboards cracking, as if someone was in there and walking. I switched on the kitchen light, but there was no sign of anyone there. I checked all the doors and windows. Everything was locked. I went back into my daughter's room and asked her if she had perhaps had a bad dream, but she was adamant about the noises she heard. I sat with her for a while before I went back downstairs to my room. I tried to be comforting. She's just a kid. She's 16 years old. I was just about to drift off, and then I heard a loud thumping coming from upstairs. I was ripped out of the light sleep that I was in, and I rushed back upstairs, but everything was quiet. At this point, I wandered around the house, turning on each and every light. It was now about 3:15 a.m. I finally drifted off to sleep, and I had a dream of my late mother, waking me up and giving me a shiny silver gun. In my dream, I realized that the gun shot arrows and not bullets. I was still admiring the gun when my mother told me to wake up and go to defend my daughter and my home. Again, I was yanked straight out of sleep, and I was wide awake. At this time, it was exactly 4:05 a.m. I heard the sounds again, and this time they were coming from outside of the front gate. It sounded as if someone was tampering with the gate, trying to open it. I walked upstairs and saw my daughter was fast asleep. Her bedroom closet is closest to the front gate. I then switched the lights on and off, indicating to whomever was at my gate that someone was awake inside of the house. I then clearly heard thudding footsteps running away in the gravel and onto the sidewalk. I wasn't able to go to sleep after that. When daylight finally arrived, I got up the courage and I went outside to investigate. I looked at the gate and I noticed there were some marks on it, and as I was examining the gate, I found what I believed to be a piece of a broken tool on the ground. I believe that someone was trying to break into our house, and I also believe that my mother, God rest her soul, came to protect us. This feels strange to say, but I think that my daughter experienced a mimic in our house. We recently moved into a brand new home in, let's just call it Tornado Alley. There were previous homes on this land, but they were wiped out by a tornado a few years back. Now, I don't know much history about the land, but I do know that at one time, this was not a good area. It was ridden with drugs and surely worse things, but has since become a quiet community with really good people. At first, our family began noticing strange things, and it started with us experiencing knocking in sets of threes. I heard them first. I heard them on the door late one night around 11 p.m. A very slow but hard knock on my bedroom door. At first, I thought that the kids were messing with me, until they all ran into my room right after it happened. My son said he heard the knocking on his closet door, and my daughter, just younger than him, said she heard them as well on her bedroom door, but hers was more of a banging knock, like someone was angry. The kids have heard them on the windows outside. I've gone outside to investigate after they've heard them, and since the home is new, there's still more dirt than grass, and I have found no footprints near the windows, except for those that match my boots. A very scary thing. My youngest, who's only 6, came into my room this morning, absolutely terrified. She was sickly white and could barely talk. I had let her fall asleep on the couch last night, and when she was awoken, she looked up to see her sister, the sister who had heard the angry knocks. She looked up to see her sister walking towards her from the kitchen, facing the back of the couch, wearing the exact same clothes that she herself was wearing. She said that her sister stopped at the back of the couch, looked down at her, and that's when she got scared, because as she said, her sister's eyes were black, and then it opened its mouth and said her nickname, Evie, but in a singing tone, like, Evie. I don't know what the hell's going on here. Does anyone have any advice on how I can get rid of this thing without having to move? If I try to cleanse our house, what prayers should I use? As a child, I dealt with some paranormal feeling stuff when I lived in Louisiana, and I'm not sure if something has attached itself to me or followed us here, but my family needs some peace. I always thought I was crazy for thinking that our childhood home was haunted, but almost 10 years later, my brothers finally admitted that they had seen, felt, and had some weird things happen to them as well. There was one room in our childhood home that me and my 2 brothers had all lived in at one point in time, and I hated that room. It was in the far corner of the house, furthest from any outside door, and was almost on the 2nd story. We lived on a hill, so the side of the house this room was at a higher level than the front of the house. I had this bedroom first, as it was a smaller bedroom compared to my brothers, who shared a room, and my parents wanted me to have privacy. Where my head rested was under the window, and I would wake up between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. and feel eyes all over me. After a few weeks of this, I'd worked up the courage to get out of bed, walked over to the window and looked out, only to see someone staring back at me. But the person would have had to have been at least 10 feet tall to be standing and looking into that window. I ran to my parents, and they said it must have been a bad dream, but it kept happening on multiple different nights. Eventually, I refused to sleep in my bedroom, and my parents allowed me to sleep in the living room. By this time, quite a few months had passed, and I felt comfortable making the living room my space. One night, I woke up on the couch at around 3 a.m., and by this time, it is completely dark aside from the small light above the stove. In this dim light, I see a man's figure sitting there, and I assume it's my brother because my brother's tall. I ask him what he's doing up, and I get no answer. Annoyed, I get up, throw my covers off, and I walk into the kitchen to get water, and then I go back, and he's gone. The weird thing is that the chair that this thing was sitting in is extremely loud when you sit down or get up from it, so I would have thought that I would have heard him. I try to shake it off and go back to bed. A few days later, it was just me and the dogs at the house. Both of my brothers had after-school activities, and the bus dropped me off before my mother got home. Our little black dog came up to me, looking for pets and loves, and I give her some pets and scratches, and as usual, I get up to take her outside. I put her on her leash and let her go outside, but when I come back inside, I see the dog asleep on the chair. I rushed back to look outside, and the leash was there, but she wasn't on it. I have to say, at this point, I remember that I started to feel a little bit crazy. This would actually happen a couple more times, where I'd think she was in one place and she'd end up being asleep somewhere else. Eventually, I moved out on my own, and one of my brothers took that room, and the cycle repeated. Once he moved out, the youngest brother took the room. Years later, we were watching some ghost video compilations on YouTube, and my youngest brother started telling us about how he used to think he could see a man in the window of that room. My middle brother and I both looked at each other in silence for a couple of seconds, until he broke the silence and said that he had also thought that he had seen a man. I joined in and told them some of my stories, and explained to them that this man that we kept seeing was the reason that I had lived in the living room for that entire year. It's strange that we all kept this quiet, yet we all experienced the same thing. I have many ghost stories. One of the scarier ones, however, happened in my childhood home when I was an adult and had moved back. I have always known that there were ghosts on this property. My dad's side of the family is all very spiritual. They either see or hear things, and so do I, apparently. When I was 20, I moved back to my childhood home with my boyfriend and our baby. It was only a couple of months old. When we moved back in, I heard what sounded like 3 older women chatting. It was close to Christmas time. My boyfriend and I were up late, and I was folding laundry. The baby was asleep in our room in her crib. I had a baby monitor that had video on it. Well, I was hearing a sound on the monitor, and I looked at the video, and the baby stirred, but she didn't wake, which was a little unusual for her. And then I notice that the sound is happening, and then she's stirring. It's not her stirring from a sound, nor is it the sound of her stirring. Anyhow, I pick up the monitor and I try to put it to my ear. At that point, I heard the most horrifying, creepy, gurgled-sounding whispers. When I put it to my ear, it seemed like it got extremely loud, like something was taunting me. I immediately dropped the monitor and I told my boyfriend that we had to go and pray over our baby. I'm not religious, but I am spiritual. I walked into the room first, and let me tell you, it seemed like a scene from a movie. I cannot even make this up. There stood the ghost, and this ghost was a mother spirit that we had had on the property and everyone had already known about. Apparently, she lost her 2 children in the flood that happened in that town. And now she's in my baby's room. Is she wanting to take my baby? I don't know what's happening here. To my knowledge, there had not been a newborn baby on the property since this woman lost hers. The spirit's hair was long and standing up like it had electricity within it. Her hands were all gnarled up, and her energy was very, very powerful. As I said, my family is very spiritual, so I feel that I've dealt with ghosts before, and what I would normally do is just tell them to leave. Just ask them, or sometimes demand that they leave. This spirit was not having any of that. I had to start screaming at the top of my lungs to this spirit. Leave in the name of Jesus! I had to scream that several times before she finally left. On that night, it was 2 a.m. when I got finished saging the entire house. I'd never been as drained in my life as I was after I had gotten done trying to make this spirit leave. I never saw that spirit again while I lived at that house, but I have had many other weird things happen there. So about 5 or so years ago, I was dating a very low energy woman. A very, very toxic person who was also an extreme alcoholic and drank nearly nothing except for vodka. I had moved this woman into my condo, where she lived with me until I couldn't take it anymore. I realized my mistake, and I ended the relationship. About a week after she had left, I was sitting in my living room watching TV when I heard my dog bark, growl, and come barreling out of my bedroom. She was onto something, as I could hear her nails ripping up the carpet as she gripped for traction. The dog was chasing something. Definitely chasing something. I raised up out of the chair, and I turned to see her running into the living room, chasing the most horrible thing that I had ever seen. It was a female. She had an emaciated torso with long, stringy, gray or blonde hair. She was crawling across the floor using her hands. She was extremely fast as my dog was chasing her and was right on her tail. I could see that this was just a torso, and from the waist down was a trail of innards dragging behind the woman. I couldn't see a face at all, and what I did see just appeared to be a dark void. I was in absolute shock looking at this thing as it crawled extremely fast across my apartment. This entity turned when it reached the end of my sofa, crawled beside it, and then disappeared straight through my sliding glass door. I had never seen this creature again, and the only thing I can think was that this was a spirit or some kind of demon that had attached itself to my ex. I've had this same weird experience twice in my life now. So the first time this happened, my sister and I were sitting in the living room watching TV. Our kids were playing in the next room, which is the dining room. Suddenly, we heard a huge crash, as if the large china cabinet fell over. There was a huge thud, a smashing sound, clattering, and it included the sounds of shattering glass. We even both swear that we felt the house shake a little bit. We obviously jumped up and ran, so scared of what we would find. But when we ran into the room where the cabinet and our children were, there sat the kids, playing, nowhere near it, and the cabinet was upright and perfectly intact. We searched the whole house up and down, and nothing had fallen over or been damaged in any way. The shattering and the breaking sounded so horribly close. It sounded exactly as if the cabinet had fallen over onto the dining table, and then perhaps the dining table had collapsed as well. We were left in utter shock and wondering what had happened. We never came to a solid conclusion. Let's move forward about 20 years later. My wife and I are sitting in the now converted dining room. My mother's bedroom was right off the hallway from us. Suddenly, we both hear a very loud crash. And I mean, it was so loud that it sounded like her shower doors had come crashing down, or as if all the glass in her room had been knocked over off of the dressers and shelves at the exact same time. We immediately ran into her room, afraid of how we would find her. But again, to my surprise, everything was perfectly fine. My mother was in bed, and her room was exactly as it should be. We searched everywhere, not only her bedroom, but the rest of the house as well, and found absolutely nothing. This has left me and my wife very confused, and I'm wondering if anyone else has had anything like this happen to them. I'm retired from a very busy trauma hospital. We who worked in the hospital all knew about room 409. As the story goes, a new mother had lost her premature baby while in that room many decades before. Even when no one was put into that room, you could often hear a baby crying. We didn't have a lot of new mothers that liked to stay in that room because, according to them, hearing a baby crying while their own baby was asleep peacefully beside them creeped them out. The crying stopped as soon as you opened the door to check, and the crying began again immediately after you closed the door. The hair on the back of your neck stood up when you got anywhere close to that room. The crying baby disturbed all the other rooms. It was awful. One night we tried to take a bright flashlight into the room and speak to whatever was in there making the crying noises. There were brand new batteries in the flashlight, and it went dead as soon as we walked into the room. Plus, another group of nurses states that they tried this again a few weeks later, and they all swear that the flashlight was knocked out of the hands that were holding it and thrown violently into the rocking chair in the corner. They left the room and are currently refusing to go back in. After that, when I had to pass by the room, I would say a quick prayer and walk by really fast. I like to think that if somebody was able to speak to it and tried to figure out what was going on, that maybe it would lessen or quiet the activity. Well, we've tried, and it didn't work. I've always thought that the hospital should have called in a priest to cleanse the room. However, the hospital, being run as a business, never wanted to acknowledge that there was a problem. This last story is a strange occurrence that has actually been a part of our lives since childhood. One night while we were home alone with our sister, we were awoken by the sound and rumble of what felt like an explosion. We met our sister in the hallway as we cautiously exited our bedrooms. We all confirmed that we had experienced the same thing, a loud explosion, felt the house rumble. Cautiously, we walked into the living room and peered through the curtains, at which time we saw what looked like 4 or 5 different flashlights shining and moving toward our house from the pasture that resided below. We lived in a very rural area, and the pasture had to have been easily 100 yards away. We ducked down and hid behind the couch, whispering to each other as we tried to understand the situation using the logic and mindset that we possessed, which was the mindset of scared children who were home alone without a parent or adult to help navigate this strange situation. At one point, we realized that our family dog was not inside. It was then that we thought that maybe the family dog may have gone into the pasture and had potentially harmed or disturbed the farmer's livestock, which resulted in gunshots, hence the rumble and the loud explosive report that we had been awakened by. Even though we thought that this was a possibility, it seemed very far-fetched, as our dog was not the kind to chase or bother livestock. We began again to peer through the windows, with even more worry as we scanned the property to see if we could spot our dog, even if he were injured. After a very short while, we did spot him. He was laying on the doormat directly in front of our front door. The dog lay there, unmoving, seemingly undisturbed by this loud sound, the vibrations, or the flashlights, and presumably the people who carried them and were seemingly coming towards our home. At this point, in our minds, some more dreadful thoughts surfaced. If the dog wasn't responding or reacting, then he must be injured, or worse, dead. It must have been a gunshot, and our pet must have made it back home before succumbing to his injuries. But this was a very pale-colored yellow lab, and there seemed to be no blood or any kind of visible sign that the dog had been injured when we looked through the window at his fur or the area on the ground surrounding him. After much more discussion and quite a bit more time, we decided that we would crack the door open ever so slightly and try to call the dog in order to see if he would be responsive. We opened the door and we spoke to our pet in a voice that we hoped would be loud enough to be heard by him, yet soft enough to avoid any unwanted attention from whatever in the hell was going on out there. Instantly, after we had started to speak, the dog popped up, happy to be let inside, which he then was. And the dog was perfectly fine. No injuries, no wounds, nothing. We didn't see the flashlights after that. We experienced nothing else. We never found out what had happened. It still makes no sense. One of the strangest things is that we experienced this event together, yet our dog, who would alert and bark if a car drove down our street, seemed to be completely unaffected and was, apparently, just sleeping on the doormat without a single care, waiting for us to open the door and let him inside, as we sat inside, panicking and fearing for our safety. Well, thank you all for being here and listening to these allegedly true ghost stories. We cannot verify whether these are true or not, so we will leave that up to you to decide. We will say, however, that the very last entry is a true story, and it came from our childhood. To this day, as adults, we have no idea what had actually happened that night. We'd like to thank you again for spending your time with us. Take care of yourselves, and please try your best to have sweet dreams.